Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Daniel. We shall finish up the last half of chapter 11 today. Recall Daniel has been visited by an angel who is sharing the final vision of the whole book, a prophetic vision. Most scholars agree these passages, these last verses in chapter 11, should be divided into two sections. Verses 21 to 35 will address the rise and power of the king of the north, the AntiChrist Epiphanes IV. Recall we met him in chapter 8, the little horn with the big ego. He is the precursor of the end times Antichrist of the book of Revelation, who will be referenced in the last part of this chapter, chapter 11, in verses 36 through 45. Let's dig in, beginning with verse 21, which tells us how AntiChrist Epiphanes came to power. This is referencing the prior verse in verse 20. This is Seleucus IV. He will be succeeded by a contemptible, King James says vile, person. This is specifically speaking about AntiChrist Epiphanes, who has not been given the honor of royalty, meaning he behaved so dishonorably. He will invade the kingdom, meaning the southern kingdom of Egypt mostly. When its people feel secure, meaning he will use deceit and break the peace treaty between the two kingdoms, he will seize it. Now he's talking about the throne. He will seize it, the throne, through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. The Egyptian army will be swept away of the south. Both it and a prince of the covenant, meaning he will replace the temple high priest with a puppet high priest, will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people, he will rise to power. The reference here is that this AntiChrist fellow was not the rightful heir to Seleucus IV, who was mysteriously assassinated. The rightful heir was actually being held captive by the Romans as collateral for a huge debt that AntiChrist III owed to Rome. So AntiChrist took advantage of this situation and argued that the infant son of Seleucus IV should be made king, and he would be the regent until the son was of age to come to the throne. And then he later murdered that son. When the richest provinces feel secure, he, AntiChrist, will invade them and will achieve what neither his father nor his forefathers did. He will distribute the plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers, and he will plot the overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. AntiChrist will choose to invade only the territories, the provinces of the south, not for tactical reasons, but just for their plunder and his ego. He will actually first bribe the corrupt officials in those other kingdoms to assist them with the overthrow, and then reward them with wealth and positions if they continue to follow him. We'll see that he actually did that with the temple itself. He also used this plunder to continue to raise this large army and navy, as we shall see starting in verse 25. With a large army he will stir up, meaning make war, his strength and courage against the king of the south. The king of the south will wage war with a large and very powerful army, but he will not be able to stand because of the plots, the deceit, the plots devised against him by AntiChrist. Again, AntiChrist, like Satan and like the final Antichrist, uses deception against his enemies or against his foe, in this case against the south, by pretending to be abiding by a peace agreement. At the same time, he instituted bribes and hatched these internal plots against the South's own palace to undermine and weaken the South's king, which in this case was King Ptolemy VI. And he finally will have this major battle and victory over the South in around 170 BC. And he'll demand this huge ransom payments in exchange for allowing the king to remain on the throne as a puppet under him. Those who eat from the king's provisions will try to destroy him. This is speaking about that treason against the king, against Ptolemy, instigated by AntiChrist within his own palace. His army, meaning Ptolemy's army, will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. The two kings, meaning Antiochus and Ptolemy, with their hearts bent on evil, both of them will sit at the same table and negotiate, but they will lie to each other, meaning they both are operating in bad faith. But to no avail, because the end will still come. God's still in charge. The end will still come at the appointed time. So the king of the south and the, quote, king of the north, Ptolemy and Antiochus, will sit and agree on a peace agreement. But with control supposedly meaning in the north, and payments to be made to the north. But as soon as Antiochus withdraws with his army and navy, the city of Alexandria decides to replace Ptolemy VI with his younger brother, Ptolemy VII. And rather than fighting a civil war between these two brothers, they decided to be co-regents of the overall kingdom, Egypt, jointly. But verse 29 will tell us this really upsets Antiochus. And 2 years later, in 168 BC, he'll return to get revenge against these two brothers. But first, let's look at verse 28. It says that when he completed his victory and his peace agreement in Egypt, he traveled back north through Judah. Let's see what happened there. The king of the north, meaning Antiochus, will return to his country in the area of Syria with great wealth that he had gotten from Egypt, but his heart will be set against the Holy Covenant, the people of Israel. He will take action against it, meaning this area of Judah, and then return to his own country. So Antiochus was successful in taking great wealth out of Egypt. He's traveling north, but he wasn't satisfied. He also disliked the Jewish people because of their refusal for many of them to abandon their old ways and to embrace his Greek culture and his Greek gods. So by using a false pretense, we learned that from history that he argued that the Jewish people were attempting a revolt. So he unleashed his entire army on the city of Jerusalem. In the book of Maccabees, which is not part of our canon of Scripture, but it is part of the canon of Scripture for the Catholic faith. And it gives us a very good historical account of the events. Let's take a look at 2nd Maccabees. Then there was killing of young and old, destruction of boys, women, and children, and slaughter of virgins and infants. Historians tell us that he killed over 40,000 people and plundered the entire city, as well as looted the temple itself before moving back to his palace up in the north in Antioch. Let's take a look at verse 29. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. And here's what's different. Ships of the western coastlands. This means the Roman ships from Greece. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart, lose courage, be afraid. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the Holy Covenant. He will return and show favor to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. In other words, he's going to benefit those that follow him and do great harm to those that refuse to. So 2 years later, in 168 BC, Antiochus will move south again against the weakened Egypt to teach those two Ptolemy brothers who's boss, and likely to continue to plunder. But as the verse says, he finds a surprise. The Egyptians have signed an alliance with Rome. So when he shows up, he'll run straight into the powerful Roman navy that had troops embarked on those ships, and also a very important, highly senior Roman official, as we shall see. Antiochus thought he'd use his cunning like he normally did, so he reached out and wanted to meet with this senior Roman official, and to avoid any kind of confrontation, likely probably to try to bribe him. As we see here in the map, he met with this official at the mouth of the Nile River in this city of Pelusium on the Mediterranean coast. Historians tell us that Antiochus was no match for this Roman official. His name was Gaius Popilus Linus. This man gave him a very short and clear ultimatum. Immediately get all your troops out of Egypt, and also get them out of Cyprus, or choose to be at war with Rome. And Antiochus apparently again tried to use his cunning to ask for a delay so he could consider it. But to Antiochus' surprise and shock, the senior official simply drew a circle, literally, around Antiochus in the sand where he was standing. That's where we get this term, line in the sand. He demanded that the king not step out of that circle until he gave him an answer. Either you will be an ally with Rome or an enemy. It is your choice to make now. Recall the verse said that Antiochus lost heart, meaning he submitted, he gave in to the demand, and immediately left Egypt with nothing except his tail between his legs. And he again, unfortunately, retreated back through Judah. And as the verse says, he took out his anger on the people of Jerusalem, as we see beginning in verse 31. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. So in 168 BC, Antiochus purposely, spitefully, and in anger desecrates the temple to make it unfit for worship. The ancient historian Josephus tells us Antiochus compelled, meaning force by force, the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country, to abandon their heritage, and to keep their infants uncircumcised, and to sacrifice swine's flesh upon the altar. He also had his puppet high priest, Jason, to set up an altar to the Greek god Zeus to further defile the temple. As a result, the temple was no longer, it was unclean, so no longer could they do daily sacrifices. And this went on for the same period as the second half of the tribulation, for over 3 years. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, meaning some of the Jewish people. But the people who knew their God will firmly resist him. There will be a segment that resists him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword, or be burned, or captured, or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will come at the appointed time. Unfortunately, many Jewish people will abandon God's ways. They'll choose to follow Antiochus and the world's ways and pay tribute and honor to him through the temple. Antiochus added to his name at this time Epiphanes, which means godlike or glorious, just like the final Antichrist will do, and demand that the people worship him as a, quote, man-god. But some will firmly resist, the verse says. This is a reference to the Maccabean revolt of that period, which was led by a family of priests and a group of resistance fighters that fought for control of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. After a brutal 3-year struggle, they actually defeated Antiochus, his troops that were stationed there in the year 165 BC. Antiochus had already become weakened from fighting on several fronts, both in the south and also some of the eastern empires, and he died a year later in 164 BC. And that same year, in December 25, 164, the temple was purified and rededicated to God. And this event, as you might know, is the event, this Jewish holiday that celebrates Hanukkah on December 25. So then we have that shift I was speaking about earlier in verse 36, to where the focus becomes not just on Antiochus, but also on the end times Antiochus, or the final Antichrist. The king, meaning the future end times Antichrist, will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will say unheard of things against the God of gods, Yahweh. He will be successful until the time of wrath is complete through the tribulation, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors. It's believed this future Antichrist will come from the former divided Roman Empire, which is, quote, a Christian empire, or for the one desired by women. This is a difficult passage. It likely refers to the fact that the Jewish women of that time viewed the mother of the Messiah as a great honor. But this king has no regard for the Messiah, is the point. Nor will he regard any god, but will only exalt himself, above them all. Again, scholars believe that this is a dual message or dual meaning between a review of this Antiochus, Epiphanes IV, but also more importantly, a review of the final Antichrist to come. Like Antiochus, this cunning future world dictator will blaspheme God. He'll desecrate the temple, and he'll greatly persecute those that follow God. And he'll love only himself and, quote, do as he pleases for a time. Verse 38, instead of them, meaning God, he will honor a God of fortresses, meaning he's focused on power. A God unknown to his ancestors. He will honor only gold and silver with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign, also translated with the help of a strange or pagan god, likely a reference to satanic or to Satan himself. He will greatly honor those who acknowledge him, those that follow him he will take care of. He will make them rulers over many people, and he will distribute the land at a price to these folks. The book of Revelations 13:2 tells us that Satan himself will empower this final Antichrist, this final dictator. And he'll take land and possessions from those that refuse to worship him, that don't bear that label 666. And he'll redistribute this wealth to only those that do worship him. He creates this division among the people versus unity. He creates hate versus love. Let's look at verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south, meaning there's this future alliance coming up from the south, will engage him, the Antichrist, in battle. And the king of the north, this is the Antichrist, will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and great fleets of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land, meaning the Holy Land, because he breaks a peace covenant with them. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. The reference to these small ancient three kingdoms are these mountainous desert wilderness border areas of Israel, as seen here on the map. They're referred to in both Ezekiel's chapter 20 and Revelations 12. It's areas where God will protect these barren regions and create safe refuge havens for the remnant faithful Jewish people that flee from the Antichrist during the time of the tribulation. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control over the treasures of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans and the Cushites, that means Ethiopia and northern Africa, in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. Reports from the east and north implies a regrouped attack against the Antichrist. But he senses this threat and will set out in rage and destroy the threat. This is all referring, this section, to the final 3.5 years of the period of tribulation, when the Antichrist has become the world ruler, and he'll be worshipped through the temple in Jerusalem, which will be dedicated to him. But as we see in the final verse 45, his days are indeed numbered. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. He will come to his end. That's the good news. That's the message of the book of Daniel, that our God is sovereign, and we can trust in his promises. And that concludes chapter 11. We'll finish up next week in chapter 12. the entire book. And we'll discuss what our next book will be. Until then, may God bless you and bless your family. And may he keep you safe. Aloha.